Okay, so round 4. Going into this round, I'm on 1.5 out of 3. So things aren't going too badly yet, but I did feel like this game was kind of important and could possibly set the tone for the rest of the tournament. So I'm playing black against International Master Balaji Dagupati, another really strong junior. Actually, Balaji ended up getting a GM norm in the third tournament in this series. He scored 7 out of 9 and did really, really well. For this tournament, I don't remember what his score was at the time. I think he lost his first game, so he might have had like 2 out of 3 or 1.5 out of 3 or something at this point. So he wasn't necessarily doing too great either. But anyway, he plays e4, which is his definitely his main move. I went for the Sicilian, and we get the open Sicilian, knight c3. Mainly, I've been playing the Taimanov in this position, but recently I've picked up this system with a6 just to kind of try a different move order. The idea is that black can maybe save on the move queen c7 and instead just play kind of like typical Taimanov style with knight f6, maybe bishop b4, maybe b5 somewhere, maybe queen c7 eventually, but the idea is that it's just a different move order. The drawback to playing this one very early is that when white takes on c6, as he does in this game, then after b takes c6, we get the pretty typical structure, except this move a6 is not really helpful for black in this position. In fact, in this game and in many games, black ends up just pushing a5, just spending a tempo to push the pawn out to a5 and then develop the bishop to a6. That said, a very, very playable position. And here Balaji plays queen d3, which is a pretty trendy move. I would say there's not a lot of games in the database with this one. And it's definitely like, engine influenced idea, because from like human point of view, okay, it doesn't look natural to block the bishop. But the point is that the queen is going to transfer over to g3, where it's placed very well, and then white can develop the rest of the pieces like bishop e2, bishop d3, and so on. I mean, bishop d3 is the main move here, and there are also lines where white goes queen f3, queen g3 this way. I'm not exactly sure what the key differences are, but I can tell you that in this line, when the queen shifts to g3 first, there are many positions where white actually develops the bishop to e2 rather than d3, and there are probably just some very concrete reasons for that. So this is kind of a fresh line, but I was prepared for this one because I've been looking at the system lately. So d5, queen g3, and here I played h5. Okay, definitely not a move I would play without some preparation. But the issue for black here is that it's hard to develop with this g-pawn always kind of hanging. So if I just go like knight f6 here, I think white plays, let's say, bishop e2, stopping knight h5, for example. Like one reason the bishop is kind of nicely placed here. And then it's not clear what I can do, because g7 is hanging. g6, I think, is going to be quite weakening in this type of position. And meanwhile, white is just going to castle, like maybe bishop e3, rook d1. And yeah, how is black supposed to develop? So h5, the point of this move is to try and harass the queen. And there was a couple of high-level games here that we end up following. Specifically, I think it was Nepomniachtchi who had a couple of games in this line as black. And it continues very interesting. So I pushed d4, knight b1, following the theory, knight f6, white goes e5, knight e4, and now queen f4. And I didn't remember exactly, but from what I could remember of the Nepomniachtchi games, he played one game against Giri and one game against MVL. They both went for this line against him. I think he also played a game against Anand in this position, or from this variation as well. Except I'm pretty sure he played f5, like either here or after h5. I think he played it here, which very, very surprising move. But anyway, so there was 2 games. In one game, I believe it was Giri, he played queen f4. In the other game, MVL played queen f3. And the differences between these two moves not that obvious at first glance. But the main point is with queen f3, if black plays bishop b4 check, white can play c3, and this just doesn't work for black. Takes, takes, and both pieces are hanging. The queen is defending c3, and black is just losing a piece. So there's no bishop b4 check, which means that black has to figure out what to do with this knight. Nepo played queen to d5, and that game MVL Nepo continued, I think it was bishop d3. Now black gave bishop b4 check, white played king f1, f5, and okay, it was a very messy position. I think objectively black is okay, but yeah, really, strange position to say the least. Anyway, so this is what I had kind of remembered during the game. And yeah, Drew asking in the chat if I'm thinking about these other games while you're playing. Yeah, definitely. At least I'm trying to remember exactly what I looked at here. Why not queen a5 check instead of queen d5? I'm not sure. There's probably some concrete reasons. One thing I would consider maybe like knight d2, and then if knight takes d2, there's queen takes c6 and stuff. So that might just be a very concrete issue. The truth is this position is very, very sharp, and there's a lot of tricks that I honestly just don't fully understand. And I normally don't like getting into positions like this where as black you're kind of forced to play like a computer to make it work. But I honestly just didn't know what else to do, because honestly this line is relatively unexplored, and other than this d5 h5, like I really wasn't sure how else black can try and develop their pieces here. But okay, something to work on. In any case, in this game white plays queen f4. And then thinking that like, okay, queen d5 is the move, I just played queen d5 because I thought that's the move. Turns out that's not the move. Turns out here black should go ahead and play bishop b4 check, which is not possible with the queen on f3 because of c3, which I didn't fully grasp during the game. But here the difference is after queen to d5, white has a very strong move bishop e2, followed by putting the bishop on f3. And of course this is not really possible if white's queen is on f3, so in that variation it makes sense why queen d5 is the move. But here after bishop e2, bishop f3, black would actually be in huge danger. I mean, there's just no easy way to figure this out. If bishop b4 check, the king is just running away, bishop f3 is coming, and everything is just hanging on this diagonal. So yeah, it was kind of interesting. After queen d5, my opponent started thinking, and up until this point we had both been not exactly blitzing out moves, but playing pretty fast. Like, we both understood, we've looked at this, we both looked at this variation. But I played queen d5 rather quickly and confidently, thinking it was the move. And then he started thinking, because, okay, he was expecting bishop b4 check, which is actually the only move in the position. And now he's trying to figure out, like, why haven't I seen this queen d5 move before? Like, what could be wrong with it? So he spends some time and he ends up playing this move a3, which, okay, is very logical if you're thinking like, okay, my opponent didn't play bishop b4 check, how can I try to exploit this? So he goes a3, stopping the move altogether. But now this gives black time to develop. Now I get f5 in, and now on bishop e2, I'm in time with like c5 and bishop b7, for example. And if white takes en passant, then here I can actually even just take with the pawn. And everything is kind of defended. I'm getting bishop h6 next, and actually black's position is starting to look pretty active. So just like that, I get a really reasonable position. And yeah, had white played bishop e2, of course, it would have been big problems for me here. But yeah, sometimes the prep works out in this way, where it's like it's almost like a bluff, where like you place the move confidently and your opponent not exactly like believing you, but doesn't know how to refute it, right? Because they just haven't checked the move. And so, okay, white makes one inaccurate move, and all of a sudden black is now totally fine. So a question about what's the plan with the king? Well, I wasn't sure. I mean, the truth is it's not so obvious where white is putting their king either. During the game, I was definitely thinking about either going queenside, or possibly keeping the king on e8 for quite some time, or at some point actually just switching and castling kingside, because it's not that easy for white to, with the knight on e4, to really make headway there. But I will say it was something that, I mean, I didn't have a clear grasp on during the game. Like, my king stays in the center for quite some time, and in many different moments I was considering castling queenside, castling kingside. Like, I honestly wasn't sure for a long time. But yeah, for white it's really not so easy either, because if they castle kingside, then they're kind of giving up on their kingside attack. If they castle queenside, there's always going to be lots of counterplay. I even have queen a2 in the position, so it's really not easy for white either. So knight d2, I take this one, bishop takes, c5. I didn't have to take on d2, but the problem is otherwise bishop c4 or knight c4 felt both pretty annoying. So I decide to stop this. c5, now just trying to get everything out. b3, bishop b7, and here white goes f3. Had he played bishop c4, I mean, I don't think I would have taken on g2 here, because after castles, I would imagine this position is extremely dangerous with my king just kind of stuck in the center. I was probably just going to go queen d7 here, and then continue bishop e7, maybe king f7. Okay, not blundering this one, but maybe castling, maybe bishop d5 somewhere, and probably this move would be pretty important to throw in, and then just challenging white's light square bishop. But okay, I essentially felt black is not really worse here. f3, bishop e7, rook h3, and queen d7. So yeah, around here, I mean, I was already considering castling queenside, castling kingside, and trying to weather the storm. This one definitely didn't appeal to me with white's rook, coming to g3. That looked very, very scary. But I also wasn't sure if I put my king on f7, how exactly white checkmates me, right? Because a lot of the squares are defended, and white doesn't actually have a lot of pieces in the position. But of course, if I start with this one, then there's bishop c4 and queen takes f5 check. So I start with queen d7, and now the idea is to try to go bishop d5 and then maybe king f7, but mainly just to stay flexible because I think I'm going to need this move anyway. And now white plays queen g3, which is kind of interesting because he totally switches plans, because I was thinking the rook is coming to g3, right? Why play rook h3 if not to go rook g3? But on rook g3, I was actually going to just play king f7 here. And then if bishop c4, bishop d5, I'm in time to kind of stop the play. And yeah, I actually didn't see how white is breaking through. Whereas, okay, I'm starting to take here. I can push a5, a4 at some point and just start making a little bit of headway on the queen side. So I'm actually starting to feel kind of optimistic at this point. Because again, there's just nothing that white can actually do to me on the king side. No way to like make a concrete threat with the rook on g3. The rook on h3, maybe he could still play for some g4 or something, but also that would be kind of hard to achieve. So queen g3. Now I played king f7, just using my king to defend this one. And bishop g5. So this is my opponent's idea. He wants to trade the dark square bishops, and then maybe he has some more dark squares to work with on the king side. I remember spending a lot of time here, and I end up playing what I think is a very good move, a5. Because white's not really threatening anything just yet, and so I'm just getting my own counterplay going with a4, bishop a6, maybe c4 one day. And yeah, if I can just like open the queen side, I mean, white's king on e1 is going to be very, very weak, especially with my rooks connected and white's rooks very much disconnected. So I felt like if the position opens up and my rooks get in, I'm essentially just going to be like, playing a rook up. Game continues, queen f4, and now I play bishop a6. White takes, rook takes, a4, stopping black from pushing a4. And okay, with white's move queen f4, I felt like the intention was to go g4 very, very soon. And then, okay, white is starting to break through at some point, because if I play g6, I'm opening up some squares around the king, and not easy to just keep the king side totally blocked off here. But white plays a4. I think this is important, otherwise this move would be creating a lot of problems. And now c4. And yeah, here I start to feel actually really good, because like I'm getting my pawn break in, I'm opening up my bishop and my rooks, And if white doesn't mate me, then, I mean, white's king is super weak. The rook is just completely misplaced on h3. So starting to look actually quite promising. But my opponent starts defending, I would say, really, really well. So he goes rook d1, which I think makes sense. If bc4, then I would probably give a check on b4, king f1, and either play rook c8 here or rook c6. This c-pawn definitely, we're going to be winning back soon, and then in the eventual structure, c2 is going to be a huge weakness. The d-pawn will be strong. Just like everything looks to be in black's favor. So rook d1 starting to fight back in the center. I took on b3 here. C takes b3, and now bishop b4 check. Definitely, this is where things start to get sloppy on my end. Because I'm essentially just like helping the king get out of the center with king to f1 here. Originally, my idea was to push d3. This is why I wanted to do this one without having the bishop on e7, meaning that white can no longer take, queen takes, and go rook takes d3. So I wanted to now avoid the trade, leave white's bishop kind of stranded on g5 where it's in the way, and just play for the d-pawn. The problem is queen c4. And just a simple double attack against the rook and the pawn. And so I'm just losing the d-pawn. I actually considered going for this position anyway. Like rook c6, takes, rook c8. And black definitely has enough for the pawn here because my rooks are very active and white is still going to have to work very hard to get his pieces back in. He can play f4, but his poor bishop is almost completely stuck. And of course, he allows like rook c1 check and things like this. So black actually has very reasonable compensation here, but I wanted to keep the queens on the board, yeah? So I didn't want to push d3. I wanted to keep the queens on while white's king is potentially weak. But now the d-pawn is hanging. So I end up going back bishop c5. And this was a real shame because this one tempo I think actually ends up making a very, very big difference. Because if I just play bishop c5 first, the king is still on e1, I can get all the same counterplays in the game, like against the b-pawn, except it's just all the tactics are kind of now working out better for black with the king closer to the action. So yeah, unfortunate slip, just essentially losing a full tempo in a sharp position. But okay, I still felt like my position here is quite reasonable because I want to go rook b6 and just go after this pawn. Now I played rook to g3, rook b6, and I think during the game we were both considering the possibility of bishop f6 here for white, which if you think about it is just the only way for white to really kind of do anything on the king's side at this point is through this kind of piece sacrifice. But I don't think it was working. So I would take e takes f6, and the idea is now to go like rook to g7 check, king takes f6, there's queen to g5. It's very, very scary, but I think I was able to play bishop f8 here and possibly survive this one. At least during the game, I wasn't extremely worried that I would be getting mated here. But with this not working, it's hard for white to figure out what to do. So he goes rook to d3. Now I played queen to b7. So I'm putting pressure on this one and also looking for queen a6. I think objectively queen d5 was stronger, but I wanted this option of queen a6 because I felt like that was pretty annoying. And then my opponent ends up playing queen c1 and it starts going backwards. So rook c8, queen d1. And now I started to feel very, very good about the position because I was really mainly just concerned with bishop f6 here. And in the game, it's kind of funny because we discussed this a little bit afterwards. In the game, I was probably going to play queen a6 in this position, allowing rook takes g7, king f8, with the idea that I'm still hitting the rook. And if white goes back, queen to d2, I have rook takes b3. And this actually looked very, very bad for white because the rook is pinned. I thought white has to go like king e2 or something, and then I have like bishop a3 ideas, rook b2, and my king looks awful on f8, but white isn't exactly mating me here with the bishop and rook, and my attack is kind of like just starting. So I thought this was kind of good for me, but Balaji, he ends up rejecting the sacrifice because he again didn't see what exactly he's gonna do if black takes and goes like bishop f8, for example, or maybe there are some other moves here as well. I think in this line I can even consider taking and trying to escape this way. And it looks scary for a second, but if Black's king is able to get out, then okay, Black is just a piece up and winning. So he doesn't want to sack. He thinks it's not working, but I don't think Queen A6, as I planned, was the right way to proceed. Because the engine, and actually Balaji mentioned this after the game. He said that he can just give the rook at some point, and the engine shows that if white goes Queen D2, let's say rook takes B3. The best move here is not King E2, as I was kind of thinking during the game, but just to run with King to G1. And the devious point here is that now the king is escaping. If I take the rook with the queen, let's say there's queen takes A5, and my back rank and everything is hanging, and I don't have any real counterplay. And if rook takes D3, then queen comes back to G5. And I'm a full rook up, but my checks are not in time, and white's ready to just go Queen G6, Queen F7 mate, among other ideas, and just mate the king. The king is just getting mated on F8. So had the game gone down this route, I probably would have lost. But of course, that's kind of the funny thing about chess. Sometimes the move isn't played, or the opponents have kind of a different perception of what's going on. So Queen C1. Just not going for the sack, but now everything is under pressure for white. Queen D1, Queen to D5, just trying to centralize, and Bishop to D2. Unfortunately for me, at this point, we're in pretty heavy time trouble. Like, we're both under 5 minutes here, I want to say. Maybe under 10 minutes, but approaching 5 minutes. And again, no second time control, so not getting more time at any point. White just goes Bishop D2, hitting the A5 pawn, but also I'm realizing intending to push F4, which opens up the queen to this H5 pawn. And that's actually very, very scary. So just for example, if I was to just passively defend the pawn, white pushes F4, and if I defend this one with G6, white already has ideas of rook takes G6. And then the second rook comes to G3, and the queen is coming to H5, or if King H6, there's rook G5. And I'm just not saving my king here. And if the king runs this way, then queen takes H5, and the king isn't getting out here either after rook to G7 and queen H8. So this is already starting to look extremely scary, this idea of F4. I decide to go Bishop B4, trying to trade off one of white's attackers. And I think on F4 I can go like rook H8 or something like that. But now he switches back Bishop E3. Very unpleasant move to face. And now the D4 pawn is falling, and it looks like I'm possibly just losing control over the entire position. So I start scrambling here. I didn't really know what to do. I play rook BC6 just to try and keep some pressure in the position. Rook takes D4, queen takes E5, F4, queen F6. He throws in this one, bishop E7, queen takes H5, king to G8, and here white goes king to G1, just trying to improve his king. So I'm down a pawn after the smoke is cleared a little bit. I didn't think things were actually that bad for me after my next move, rook to D6. I was happy to have found this one because now I'm kind of challenging white's rook, and I'm also getting ready to activate both rooks. Let's say rook D3, rook C3, something like this. And main idea behind this move actually is I'm just stopping bishop D4. Otherwise, bishop D4 would be absolutely devastating. So that's probably the main reason why this move is needed. So takes, rook G6 is played. And at this point, I think we're both like under a minute, just playing on the increment. And this is a very, very tough position to just play on the increment because you have like 30 seconds per move and lots of stuff is hanging. There are lots of tactics in the position. Here, for example, I didn't want to just play like queen F7, which looks solid because of bishop D4 and G7 starts to hang and stuff. So I ended up playing queen C3, hoping for rook takes E6 because then I would have queen E1 check, and bishop takes F4. So I managed to see this one. If takes, then queen takes E6, and then if king H3, queen H1 is just mate. So Instead, after queen c3, white ends up going back, rook to g3. I repeat because I have no time, so I might as well repeat the position. And now queen d1, so Balaji switches gears and goes for this one. And here I'm like super terrified of bishop d4. So I end up playing e5, which is, yeah, pretty serious mistake probably, because it just weakens the position a lot and gives white queen d5 check and a lot of new weaknesses to attack. I could have still defended it. Like bishop f8 I think is probably the human move here, just covering g7 first, and then on bishop d4 I can play queen takes h4. I think the engine also points out bishop e7, with the fantastic point that bishop d4 is just met with rook to d8, and white actually has more issues here than black does. But okay, I didn't see this. Again, 30-second increment, I play e5, queen d5 check, king h7, rook to g5, possibly threatening rook h5 check. I go rook e8. Here white does throw this one in, king g6, rook g5, king h7, and he goes queen f3. And yeah, now queen h5 check looks like a very serious threat, so I play queen to f7. I should have actually played g6. I didn't in the game just because at a glance, I was worried about h5. But it turns out actually black would have enough tactical juice here after e takes f4 to make it work. Because now I have tricks on the back rank, and the rook is hanging. In fact, if white takes on g6 with check here, then king g7, white is actually in big danger here, because after, for example, here there's queen a1 check, and then the rook comes to the h-file, and everything is kind of hanging in white's position. There's queen e1 coming next, and yeah, white is actually just lost here. Okay, white can go rook takes g6, and the position is still super messy. So yeah, I mean, okay, this was obviously very hard to figure out, and so I decided to go queen f7, but now f takes e5, rook takes e5, bishop d4. And here I was kind of counting on the move bishop c5, otherwise g7 is hanging, and black has huge problems. But the issue is white trades, goes rook h5 check, and I actually don't have a way out here. If king g8, there's queen a8, and queen f8, rook h8, game over. And if king g6, unfortunately I spotted this during the game, there's queen g3 check. Very nice resource. If I take the rook, it's queen g5 mate. And if king f6, then queen d6, and white picks up the rook. Because now I'm forced to go queen e6, and white can take this one. So I realized in time that bishop c5 is not working, and then it's like, well, what to do? Because rook e1 check, king f2, and again, everything is hanging in black's position. So I end up trying queen to c7, yeah, just giving the exchange, but okay, hoping for some checks, but it doesn't really pan out. King g3 takes, king h3, white's king hides, and the counterplay runs out. I'm just down an exchange, and my king is getting mated. So the game ended here very quickly after g6, h5, queen c1 takes, rook takes f5, and I resigned here because I just don't really have any more ideas. Queen h6 check is met with either rook h5 or queen h5. I think is probably even better. And yeah, my king is about to get mated. I'm down the exchange. Everything is lost. So this was the fourth game in a row that I end up down in exchange. This one, unfortunately, not really intentional. Next game would be the fifth game in a row that I'm down in exchange in the tournament. Yeah, what can I say? Unfortunately, this one was lost in the time scramble. I felt like I had a good position in the middle game, around these parts. Things felt very good. But the position got very sharp and out of control, and Balaji just played much better in the time scramble, kind of posing problems and then figuring out the tactics better than I could. Although I do feel like maybe black's position was also kind of tougher to play here. Not so much because I'm down a pawn, but rather the king is weak and white has these kind of tactical chances. So yeah, ended up losing this one. Definitely an unfortunate game. I felt like it could have gone either way, but what can you do in these time scrambles? Of course, you can't really control everything.